Hey, welcome and thanks for joining us on World Insight. I'm Dichuan in Beijing, sitting in for Tianwei tonight. On tonight's program, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is constantly ranked the most powerful woman in the world, but her approval rating is slipping. Polls show Merkel may face a tough time winning re-election. Can she beat the skeptics? And how will Merkel's future influence the European Union? Plus, children in China are starting their education at an earlier and earlier age. Many parents are enrolling their young ones in educational activities outside of regular school. What impact is the focus on education having on Chinese children, preschool age and younger? Will it all be worth it? We begin tonight's show in Germany, where Chancellor Angela Merkel is under great pressure to satisfy her people. An opinion poll published Sunday showed 50% of Germans are against her serving a fourth term in office after a federal election next year. Now, it comes in the wake of the refugee crisis, which has seen hundreds of thousands of refugees flood into Germany. Critics say the refugee crisis has fueled a lot of security problems in Europe. There are also great challenges ahead for Merkel to keep the European Union together following the Brexit vote.
Down, down, down. German Chancellor Angela Merkel's approval rating continues to decline as the 2017 federal election in Germany draws near. According to an Imnet poll for the Bild am Sonntag newspaper last week, only 42% of the 501 people polled wanted Merkel to remain as chancellor, while half of them wanted her to leave. In November, the newspaper's earlier survey showed that 45% of respondents were in favor of Merkel serving a fourth term, with 48% against. Back in April of 2015, Merkel's approval rating was running as high as 75%. Support for Merkel has weakened after a string of violent terror attacks on civilians in Germany and elsewhere in Europe. This has raised opposition to Merkel's open-door migration policy, which allowed hundreds of thousands of people from the Middle East, Africa, and elsewhere into Germany last year. Germany's Federal Office for Migration and Refugees said a maximum of 300,000 refugees were expected to arrive in Germany this year.
These are indeed challenging political times, but what also gets one down is the question of security for us at home, and also doing everything to stop the current wars in Syria and others. Therefore, we here in Germany should consider ourselves happy to be able to live in peace together despite the problems we have.
Another challenge for the Chancellor is the Brexit procedures. European leaders are urging the United Kingdom to leave as soon as possible. Some even want Britain to pay the price. As a large trading nation, Germany is cautious about taking these tough actions. The UK's leaving might hinder trade in Europe, which would hurt the German economy a lot.
We've agreed to make these steps because we respect Great Britain's decision. But we, of course, would also like to make clear that the other 27 member states can count on a prosperous and safe Europe. There is a big diversity, but also a common ground of which this European Union consists of.
Merkel was expected to officially announce that she's running for a fourth term as chancellor earlier this year, but she's kept silent as her popularity goes down. The 2017 election will decide not only the fate of Germany, but also the fate of the whole European Union, given the central role Berlin plays in the EU.
Now, for more on Angela Merkel, we are now joined in our Beijing studio by Mr. Cui Hongjian. He's the director of the Department for European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. And in Brussels, we have Mr. Daniel Groh, director of the Center for European Policy Studies. Thanks for joining us, sir. Now, first of all, we want to have Ms. Angela Stanzel, who's joining us on the phone. She's a policy fellow in the Asia program of the European Council on Foreign Relations. To you, Ms. First. Now, Angela Merkel's popularity has taken a big hit, especially after the two Islamic attacks in July, with the latest poll showing that only 42% hope that she will remain chancellor. Now, my question to you is her refugee policy the biggest reason for that low approval rating? What about other reasons?
Well, I think there are a lot of other reasons. The refugee crisis is one major reason, sure, but given the crisis we see around Europe and now also within Europe, so for example, the Brexit, but beforehand already the financial crisis, the terrorist attacks that started this year in Germany, but we have seen them already before in Europe. So actually there are dozens of reasons. But I think the popularity also is sinking because the demands to Merkel have risen equally to the crisis that we have seen in Europe. And then let's look at where she came from. She had an overwhelming popularity during the last elections in Germany. And even though her popularity is sinking now, it's still so much more than many other global leaders. I think a lot of leaders would be still envious to be where she is. I think one of the big problems in terms of what you just mentioned, the terrorist attacks happening in Germany, and in reaction to that, the sinking popularity, is not quite reflecting all the problems we are facing. For example, in Germany, most of the terror attacks we have seen this summer were actually not committed by migrants or refugees. Some of them were committed by right-wing, extremist right-wing people, actually psychologically ill people, who might have been, the actions might have been triggered by this extremism we see in many different ways in Europe, but actually they not had primarily anything to do with the migrant crisis in itself. So I think one should also be careful to blame basically the refugees, solely the refugees, for the sinking popularity of Merkel. And as I said, although her popularity is sinking, I still think that the majority of Germans, I mean, these polls are also kind of short-term, sometimes just reflect the short-term emotions. I still think that the majority of Germans would actually vote for her again next year.
Now, with her popularity sinking, her Christian Democratic Union Party, CDU, are expected to face a very strong challenge from the anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany, AfD party. Give us an understanding of the party, AfD party's support there right now in the country, Ms. Stanzel.
Yes, I mean, AfD, I think, according to the recent polls, are at 11%, which is more than, for example, one of the oldest political parties in Germany had, the FDP, and it's very close to the Greens, for example, so it shows the rising popularity of the AfD. Although I think it's also important to point out that AfD not only stands for being anti-Europe, it also stands for being quite right-winged by now. So it has attracted a lot of the right-winged people who think that by voting AfD they might have a stronger voice in Germany. But obviously there are also, especially from the Christian Democrats, probably more from the right side, that now have chosen to join the AfD because they thought that Merkel's policy has been too tolerant and not as conservative as it used to be.
And Ms. Stanzel, his party is also politically allied to Bavarian sister party, the Christian Social Union. Two parties often clash over refugee policies, and some warn that the split emerging in Merkel's Union Party are threatening to stop the basic works. So are potential risks of political division exaggerated, do you think?
I think they're a little bit exaggerated. I don't see a split between the parties happening just yet. I think it's also probably too early to tell. I do think that, there are already problems. There will be more problems, more disagreement. I think overall, in my view at least, the CSU, the Bavarian party, kind of still stands for the old Germany, while as Merkel has been quite a lot adjusting actually to the events happening in the world nowadays, and she is more presenting the new Germany. I do think that these parties will come together again at one point, but I think it will cost her some votes in the elections to come, but it will not be the reason for the loss of too many votes.
All right, Angela Stanzel joining us from Berlin on the phone. Many thanks for your insights. Now let's get more perspectives from Mr. Cui joining me here in the Beijing studio, and also Mr. Gro joining us there in Brussels. To Mr. Cui first. So Ms. Stanzel just said that he doesn't think the refugee crisis is the biggest reason for the low approval rating for Merkel. Do you agree with that?
Exactly. Certainly now, Germany and some other member states of the European Union are facing so many crises. But indeed, for Germany, itself, certainly the refugee issue, refugee crisis, and especially the policy from Merkel's government is one of the major crises facing to Germany. Because as we understand now, Germany enjoyed its very, very good economic growth compared with some other member states of the European Union, and more stability especially, and less terror attacks in Germany compared with some other countries in Europe. But the major challenge now to the government in Germany certainly is a refugee crisis, because as we understand, it's not only a immigration or refugee issue, it's also a big issue related to the social affairs and also political affairs. If we look at this, how it is a big issue of integration of refugee and migration in the society of Germany, and also how is this political impact on this society, especially the far right wing political forces get raised in Germany. And also maybe the worst situation of it is once there are more terror attacks happened in Germany, and once there are some more attackers was regarded has the background as migration. Certainly the connection between the refugee policy of Chancellor Merkel and this security issue, certainly there will be more and more negative response from public.
So you think the refugee crisis is definitely a major challenge
Sure.
for her. And Mr. Groh, the chancellor, was actually once considered a firm favorite for Nobel Peace Prize for how she handled the migrant crisis. Now, her accusers are claiming that she is turning Germany into a caliphate. How did that all happen? Did she underestimate the challenge?
It is certainly the case that she didn't imagine how many people would come when Germany reacted to the crisis, which was actually a Hungarian crisis in the summer of 1 year ago, by basically bowing to reality. All these people wanted to come to Germany, and Germany could have closed its borders, but then Austria would have to close its borders, and the entire European free border area of Schengen would have collapsed. So I think she did what was basically unavoidable. And also, the crisis is really over, because there are no more refugees coming to Germany. But what lingers is the perception. The perception that refugees are still coming, the perception that these refugees are changing Germany, and the perception that these refugees represent a security problem. I think the perception is, the real problem, because in reality, Germany can pay for these refugees, and so far they have not represented a major security problem. But that's the key issue. They have basically woken up Germans that they're no longer a secure country isolated from the rest of the world. The problems from the Middle East have come to Germany, and people are afraid. I think that's the major reason for it.
So given all that, the election is coming up next year. Mr. Cui, the chancellor has yet to announce whether she will be seeking a fourth term. Do you think she will be seeking another term under such circumstances?
Yeah, I think, now the question is not Chancellor Merkel will take another term as chancellor. The question is, except for Chancellor Merkel, how about other politicians in Germany could take the place of Madam Merkel? Because as we know, even, yes, Merkel has less and less popularity in Germany, but so far nobody else could take the place of Chancellor Merkel as a leader with get so many support from Germany, not only from Germany and also from European countries at large. And also, I think the question to Chancellor Merkel is, how could she get a judgment on the timing and the issue once she wants to take another term as a chancellor? especially how is this refugee policy, because it could be a very, very fragile, issue taken by some other opposition once there is an election. So I think before Chancellor Merkel have a very good idea to persuade or convince the German public to say that, okay, this refugee is good as possible. And I think before that, it will take some more time for Chancellor Merkel to make a decision.
Mr. Guo, how do you look at Angela Merkel's chances of becoming the chancellor for another term? And because Germany is considered the powerhouse of the European Union, how do you think the federal election will influence the future of the EU?
Well, first of all, one should not overestimate the importance of a single person in a country like Germany. In a country like Germany, power is very much diffuse. There are many parties, many institutions, and many participants who have a power. Merkel was important when there was a crisis. In the refugee crisis, she personally took a decision which might have been a little bit different if there had been another chancellor. But on most day-to-day business and on most EU business, the decision she takes or she has taken would be very similar to any other decisions by another chancellor, because she is expressing a German consensus on Europe in most cases. So I think in that sense it doesn't really matter that much whether it's Angela Merkel or somebody else. As long as the German economy remains strong, Germany will have a key role to play in Europe, and therefore one should not pay too much attention to her personality, to Angela Merkel, but much more at how the entire landscape of parties develops in Germany. And there we have a growing problem. It can still be contained, but it is a problem nevertheless, in the sense that the anti-establishment parties are getting stronger. The center, basically the major parties, is getting weaker. And this makes German policy overall weaker. And this is, of course, dangerous for the EU. But for the time being, the problem can be limited. And I think that is the key issue for Germany. Not so much Angela Merkel, yes or not, but how strong will the anti-establishment, the protest parties become?
All right, we want to take a closer look at the refugee problem now. Now, Wednesday is the one-year anniversary of Merkel's now famous statement, quote, "We can't do this," when asked about the rising tide of refugees. I want to read to our viewer this first, and we can talk about it. Now, Germany is undoubtedly the nation that shows the most generosity to migrants. According to the Pew Research Center, a record 1.3 million migrants applied for asylum in Europe in 2015. Around 1/3 of the applications went to Germany, making it the primary destination country. Now, the number of migrant arrivals in Germany was much bigger, around 1.1 million in 2015. But her own Vice Chancellor, Sigmar Gabriel, said the Chancellor had, quote, "underestimate the challenge." Now, Mr. Sui, do you believe that Germany can really do this, as the Chancellor said?
I think it's not an issue of how is the capability of Germany could receive a refugee from other country, and also it doesn't matter with an economic issue, say that if Germany could pay for that. I think it's an issue of how could this society and the public people, average people in Germany, could follow the policy of Chancellor Merkel, and especially how about the daily life of this refugee? How could this refugee get along with the local people in the daily life?
How to integrate these refugees into the country,
into
the job market.
Right.
Now, Ms. Groh, what's your take on this?
I think many people have not realized that actually her policy has already changed almost totally. Germany is no longer welcoming to refugees, and the crisis has actually ended because no more refugees are coming. So what her enemies actually are saying when they say change policy, the policy has already changed. What they're saying is just say something else. Give the perception that Germany is not welcoming. Because the laws and regulations have already made de facto Germany much less welcoming. And the real problem is that these people are already in Germany. They cannot be sent back, and Germany has to deal with them, and they have to integrate, as you mentioned beforehand. And actually that is not proceeding too badly. Financially, Germany can bear the burden, and it always takes a long time before refugees can get into the labor market. We know that. It will take perhaps 5 to 10 years. But all indications are that the problems are not worse than about 20 years ago when many Yugoslav refugees came to Germany. So overall, I would say, in reality, Germany can do it, but the perception remains that there are too many people already in Germany, that more and more coming. And again, it's this perception, this insecurity feeling, which is so important, not so much the facts on the ground and the actual policy of the government, which has already changed totally.
And Mr. Cui, Merkel is also facing pressures not only domestically, but also abroad. Now, he is seeking to steer diplomacy ahead of the first EU summit without Britain on September 16th in Slovakia. Now, with EU members such as Poland and Hungary repeatedly rejecting a quota system for resettlement for new arrivals, leaders are likely to fall short of a permanent solution. Do you expect a breakthrough this time?
Yeah, it's difficult because, as we know now, within the member states of the European Union, especially those member states from Central and Eastern European countries, including Hungary and Poland, you mentioned, and also Slovakia, the host of this summit. There are with which got the four group. All of the four countries, certainly they are opposite this policy of Germany to open the door to the refugee. So I think it's this time it's very difficult for Germany to try to get a European Union solution for the refugee, because I think at this moment these Central and Eastern European countries will take that advantage of hosting this summit to have more the one attitude or their policy to change perhaps the direction which dominated before by Germany or some other major member states. So I think, yes, we are looking for a European Union solution, because as we understand, refugee issue is not only an issue in Germany and it's a European issue, but now the reality is the diversity of perception, understanding, and also the interest in it. So it's difficult for this moment.
All right, we got to go there. But thank you for all your perspectives, Mr. Cui joining me in the Beijing studio, and also Mr. Daniel Groh joining us there in Brussels. Appreciate it. Now stay with us on World Insight in our final segments coming up. Chinese children are starting their education at an earlier age. Many parents also enroll them in activities outside of regular school. What impact is the focus on education having on preschool and younger children? That's next. Welcome back. On September the 1st, the new school term will start here in China. Students have to go back to classes after a long holiday. But in China, many children never stop studying, even during their summer break. It's the case for many children who are preschool age or younger. Now, there is no secret that the Chinese value education above everything else, but that can't start before a child is even born. There is a famous saying in Chinese, do not let your children lose at the starting point. It is a philosophy that has created a lucrative industry called early childhood education, from prenatal to the age of 6.
7 plus 7 goes.
Xinyu is only 3 years old, but her days might be just as busy as yours and mine. Besides an 8 to 5 kindergarten she attends 5 days a week, she is also enrolled in this early childhood education center that's focused on right brain development. She has been going there since she just turned 1. Her mother, Fang Nan, originally enrolled her so that she can become more outgoing, but they quickly found out that it does much more than just that.
Early childhood education is very different from kindergarten. Kindergartens are focused on kids playing together, doing things in group, learning facts. Early childhood education classes here target more specific aspects of a child's development. It focuses on the right brain development, visual stimulation, attention span and memory training. I find it very effective.
Many parents, like Xingyu's mother, believe that there's more potential in a child than one can imagine. They want to enroll their children in all kinds of classes to stimulate their brain in every way.
I feel that Asian countries value early education more than Western countries. Kindergartens are no longer meeting the needs of parents, especially in first and second tier cities. The brain develops the fastest in the first 6 years, so we need to stimulate it in the right way.
Of course, these centers are not only limited to brain development. Whatever you want to train your newborn with, there's guaranteed a place just for that. From music to gymnastics to painting to swimming. This baby swimming center was formed 2 years ago and has seen robust growth. It is now expanding to 18 locations.
China's early education industry started in China's first and second tier cities in the late 1990s. It went through a reshuffling phase in the late 2000s and has now entered a more sophisticated stage with just a few key market players. The ones that have survived are either providing the most convenience or have something very special to offer.
Ma says the market is still far from reaching its full potential. Demand for early education services in China's third and fourth tier cities has just started to grow. But as lucrative as this industry is, it is also directly linked with our next generation's future. Therefore, it needs to be developed with patience and love.
Now for more on preschool education here in China, we're joined in our Beijing studio by Professor Teng Jimeng from the American Studies Center at the Beijing Foreign Study University. We're also joined by Professor David Moser, Academic Director of Chinese Studies at Capital Normal University. Welcome to you all. Now, the Chinese government actually has made early childhood development a national priority, so there's so much to talk about. First of all, let's put things into context. The policy of one-child policy, the effect of one-child policy on early education. Professor Tong first.
Well, I think that this is going to be a very, very important issue. I think it is right to prioritize the education of that one child in the family, because this is supposed to be not just the future of the family, but also the future of this very nation. But once again, I think it might be a little bit too early for these kids to be kind of preschooled. I mean, think about kids at the age of 3. It could be shockingly surprising to me. I mean, because these kids are not capable of cognitive processing, I mean, recognition of the basic symbols, like language, for example. I mean, they are not even able to speak at that very time.
The parents nowadays, they make major investments in their children, in the education system. They don't want to lose at the start point. Professor Moser, what do you think of this?
Well, I think that we know, from what we know about childhood education, that the main thing is to give them a stimulating environment with lots of input, and not necessarily a regimented environment. That is, give them lots of varied experiences, and let them explore the world on their own terms. But there are a few areas which I think there's also evidence that it's good to start early. One is languages, obviously. If a child starts learning a foreign language, even just for fun or being around it at the age of 3, 4, they'll learn it much better. And other things like music are better. The only way you can get a world-class classical pianist is to start them at the age of 3, right? But for most other things, I think it's probably better just to give them a rich environment. That's enough.
You mentioned a very interesting point, the differences between free play versus group teaching. This is a different style between Western style of pre-education and Chinese style. So let's just take some time to examine the difference, and then maybe we can reach a conclusion of which way is really better for, say, Chinese school, in Chinese children in such a context here. This is like a $1 million question for those parents that are watching, because parents are now shying away of spending so much more just to send their kids to these international schools in order for their children to enjoy a Western style of education. So teaching method first. So Western style of preschool theory, they focus on delivery of child-initiated play, whereas Chinese programs are predominantly teacher-centered with strong emphasis on mastery of knowledge, obeying authority, and utilizing high-structured activities. Professor Stone, which way is better for you?
Well, I think it's very hard to say. I think, once again, I think I need to seek a kind of some kind of a golden mean somewhere in between. I mean, on the one hand, I think Chinese education focus on this very teaching, doing all the talking. I mean, this cramming, this got the dog cramming way. I mean, so students are supposed to be obedient. Lots of learning by rote memory and the recitation, and with a focus on the Asian classics. But at the same time, I mean, students are not robots. I mean, they cannot just sit down over there, I mean, sitting in a cell with, being basically compelled to sitting in a cell-like classroom environment. But Western, and in this sense, I think Western way of teaching also enjoys considerable advantages in terms of providing an open environment where student and teacher can interact without focusing on one person and without actually, in a sense, students learning by rote memory, but lots of interactive, lots of kind of exposure to the real world of wisdom, the realities, in a sense, lots of real practical knowledge instead of book knowledge out there.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
There was a researcher many years ago named Howard Gardner at Harvard,
right.
who did a lot of study on this comparative learning between skill learning and then just general problem-solving learning. And he noted, for example, if you teach a child how to open a door with a key, if you put the key in the child's hand and direct them through it, they will learn very quickly how to open a door. If you just simply give them the key and say, figure out how to open the door, it may take them longer, but in the process of learning, they've also learned a very important skill, which is general problem solving.
Right.
When they're faced with a new skill later on that they've learned, they can teach themselves.
That's right.
So, but I agree with Professor Tung that there is a kind of a golden mean here, because you can't just throw children to the wolves and let them go on their own completely. On the other hand, you know, there is something to say. Children are very good learners. Evolution has made them the best to be expert learners.
Right.
So,
an interesting research says, like you mentioned, scholars actually pointed out that teachers-led group learning is not only efficient, but they also reflects Chinese culture. They call it a more superior way of teaching. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, as an educator here in China, teaching almost like 25 years. I mean, my focus is basically college education. But then once again, see, if you go to this early education, preschool education, I think that there's great potential for kids to learn and learn at a very young age, and then to, in a sense, to combine this very classroom teaching environment with the kind of a free environment teaching. And back to what Professor Moses said, I think that what we are trying to, in a sense, to cope with is a challenge of Chinese students to, in a sense, to learn problem solving in terms, not just in terms of learning the book knowledge.
Does our system kill creativity?
In a sense, it doesn't encourage. I won't say it kills, but then it doesn't encourage. But there's lots of kind of encouraging in terms of learning the book knowledge first, and then upon graduation, you will be this very person capable of doing.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. You know, this issue of creativity. There is a traditional notion in Chinese that you first must master the basic skills, which is called 基本功, right? And then it says, well, until you've mastered the basic skills, how can you possibly be creative?
Right.
Whereas in the West, the notion is, well, children are naturally creative. Let them create even at a very early age, even if the results are not very masterful. So I think this is a kind of a tension. And I'd also point out another very important thing. I think this notion of book learning and skill set learning, where you get a head start by teaching them very early, you know, these skills. I think that was good in the old days, meaning when we were growing up. But I think the world is changing so fast that you cannot be sure that in 20 years when the child grows up, that those same skills are going to be useful.
Right,
yeah,
right.
They may be using something so different in terms of computer technology and skills. You can't even imagine it now. So I think you need to prepare them for these uncertainties.
That's right.
And one distinct feature about Chinese preschool education is extracurriculum activities. On one hand, parents want their kids to have a happy childhood, and on the other hand, they don't want their children to fall behind. And how do you strike a balance between that?
I think once again, this is also a reflection of the crisis of Chinese education. On the one hand, I think the Chinese education focus on the so-called the development of the elite, to develop the brains of those best of the best. But then at the same time, that education system is also used as a way to create a new caste system. I mean, universities, is supposed to be the real threshold that you have to cross so that you become a real qualified person in the society. And so this is also something I think that we need to cope with as a challenge in the future. I mean, parents must realize that education is not supposed to be for status. It's not for a showy status, but it's all for developing the kids and developing that kids as a whole person.
And we have actually a kindergarten guidelines here. This was first drafted in 2001 and then updated in 2012. It says, intensive skilled training is inappropriate for young children. Preschool teachers are officially discouraged from teaching children academic knowledge at elementary school level, yet many parents insist on doing so. So many classes for their kids. It's very hard to not do so when you see everybody else are doing this. Is learning academic matters so early really good for kids, Professor?
I think it's the same thing we just talked about. You understand the parents' desire to give them what they think is a head start, but actually I think that learning to learn and learning to explore are so basic that if you really want them to excel, they've got to have that as a basis before they even start. If you just teach them academic aspects at a young age before they're really ready, as you said, to cognitively absorb them, then it becomes a kind of a rote process where the child is mechanically applying rules instead of actively engaging. We've all seen the children who start violin lessons too early, perhaps, and they are playing the violin, but it's a robot they're sawing away, and not someone who's actively feeling the music. So I think the notion of a head start is a good one, but I think it may be misguided in those particular cases.
Let me just read this to our viewer and to you all first, and we can talk about it. Now, there is also a growing trend of younger students now studying overseas. In 2015, there were more than 500,000 Chinese students studying abroad, and the number of children receiving kindergarten, preschool, and primary education abroad composed 1/5 of them. Can you believe it? On one hand, that's the result of an income increase among many Chinese families. On the other hand, Chinese parents believe their children will get a better education overseas. I guess that put us back to the question we proposed first of all, just which way is really good or better for Chinese young students, Chinese children?
Well, I don't think there is a better way or a better way or a worse way. I mean, for better or for worse. I mean, children need, once they're of that age, they needs to be exposed to this very general world, the world of reality, the world of wisdom, the world of everything that they should learn. And so by taking a young kid to go abroad and study, I mean, that's good. I mean, as long as you are financially stable, financially qualified, I think it's great. It should be a great experience. But then once again, I mean, if you are a Chinese kid, and so I'm basically old school, and I think that kid needs to be well versed first in the Chinese classics. I mean, a little bit of the classics, a little bit of Confucianism, and then try something else. And so in that sense, you can find a comparative world, a different world that you might be exposed to, and find the real meaning and insight into that very world with a very basic perspective.
So how should parents make decisions whether to send their children to international schools or even overseas at a very early age?
There are some things to consider. Obviously, the family life is very important. I know several Chinese friends who have done this, and it depends on a different way. If you're capable of the entire family just emigrating to Canada or somewhere, Okay,
well, they need the parent to be around.
They need the
right.
parent to be around. That's my point. And I do know several parents who have, in fact, just sent their kid to a relative or to a friend or something. So they may be there. They're in an English language and an English or Western environment, let's say. But you shouldn't downplay the role of the family environment. You're not there with your parents. That could actually cripple them emotionally.
Could be cultural orphan. Right?
They could be cultural orphan. And then the other thing you have to consider is what you just said. If you say we're going to send them over there, it's going to solve all their educational problems. Yes, but you're going to get a kid who's culturally foreign.
Right.
And they when you come back, they won't recognize this culture or have any part in it.
Right.
And are you willing to pay that price? And I think that's something they need to think about.
There's also CEO classes here in China for preschoolers, and it's actually quite expensive. This is for age 3-year-old to 12-year-old. It costs 50,000 yuan, or about $10,000 a year for 1 or 2 sessions weekly. How do you see this phenomenon?
That's absurd. I mean, the first word that comes to my mind is absurdity, is anti-life. I mean, basically, it was a very rude way to deprive a child of its natural growth. I mean, this is absolutely, unacceptable. I mean, see, no kids can be a CEO at the age of 3. I mean, this is such a joke. I mean, in this, to my knowledge, and so also, I mean, according to news, this is all fraud. I mean, they lack the basic equipment, they lack the basic management. I mean, basically you are managing 3 years kid, very rowdy kids out there. I mean, how can they be CEOs?
Well, they say they offer classes that develop CEO characteristics.
Well, knowing what we know about the character of some CEOs, I don't think you want their kids to. I don't think they want their kids to develop these sorts of, corrupt characteristics that most CEOs engage in. If you're going to spend that much money just to make them a CEO, why not just pay them that salary once they grow up? I mean, if the idea is to make money, but the other thing is, with companies. Not every child is obviously going to be interested in the corporate world. I mean, assuming. In fact, probably if I were an intelligent child at a certain age, when I catch on what my parents are doing, the first thing I would do is rebel and say, forget it. I'm not even going to be an artist. I'm going to be an artist.
Yeah, only an artist.
Yeah.
All right, I wish we had more time to talk about this, but we got to go now, running out of time. Thank you very much, Professor Moser and Professor Tang, joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Now that's all for today. If you'd like to see more, you can visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine, or check our YouTube channel as well. From me, Li Tu, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for more insights from across China and around the world.